Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Sitecore as an Intranet, a best-of-breed solution, co-hosted by Sitecore Nonlinear Creations Telligent. My name is Caitlin Wisman, Partner Marketing Manager at Sitecore, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin the webinar, a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, and a link to the recording will be sent out to all attendees within the next few days. We will also be doing a live Q&A at the end of the call, so please type in your questions throughout the webinar in the questions panel of GoToWebinar. Today's webinar will be presented by Nonlinear Creations VP of Technology and Sitecore MVP Glen McInnis. Glen has been part of the Nonlinear team since 2006 and a Sitecore MVP since 2008. He has spoken at various events, including Gilbane and Symantec Web. He sits on the advisory board for the Toronto Sitecore user group. At this point, I will turn it over to Glen to begin his presentation.
Thanks, Caitlin. So a short, succinct agenda today. I'll give you a brief overview of who Nonlinear is. I'll take a few moments and introduce the three technology products that I'm going to be talking about, Sitecore, Telligent, and Coveo, and why we might combine those together to create a larger solution. I'm then going to walk through 5 use cases, really with some background on why we see these come into play in intranets, some details on the requirements, how we solve them, and then explaining with either screenshots or some demos how that's actually accomplished. Lastly, I'll spend a few minutes talking about how we can accelerate your intranet project with the KEYSTONE INTRANET built by Nonlinear Digital. And then at the end, we're going to reserve, as Caitlin said, about 15 minutes for Q&A. So again, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. So the brief overview of Nonlinear: we are a privately held, full-service digital marketing agency. We've been in business since 1995, so a long time now for the internet world. Geographically, we're Canada, the US, South America, and the United Kingdom. And all of those solutions that we're building for our customers, whether it's the marketing website, the intranet, or e-commerce, are based on 2 key technology partnerships, namely Sitecore and Microsoft. On the Sitecore front, we've been at it a long time. We've been a partner since 2008. The team at this point is well past 250 different deployments. So it really just saying that if Sitecore can do it, we've seen it, we've built it, we've made it do that. Sitecore has recognized our contributions to the Sitecore ecosystem. We are a platinum partner. We have 6 MVPs on staff, including 1 digital strategist. That's the most of any partner. And then a large bench of experts, both technical and UX, that are trained and really know how to make the Sitecore platform deliver for our customers. So 3 key things that I want to try to leave you with today. We all know the Sitecore platform is a world-class content management system and marketing engagement technology, but it can also be the foundation of a world-class intranet. So I'm going to explain that. Tangential, the personalization capabilities in Sitecore, and we would normally think about engaging customers on our website, can also be used to engage employees. But they can also be used as tools to facilitate content management in an intranet scenario, and I'll actually show how that happens. And then finally, Nonlinear has proven approaches in technology that can help accelerate your intranet deployment and really drive early ROI. So let's jump into the technology products that we're talking about, Sitecore, Telligent, Coveo. So as I've already briefly mentioned, Sitecore, really we see that as the engine that drives the employee experience. There's so much behind Sitecore at this point in time with the latest version 8.2 that I couldn't do it all justice, but obviously the original strength being content management, and now with XDB, the ability to personalize, track, and really engage with the user. So lots more at sitecore.net. Telligent, a partner of Sitecore's, is really about building communities And again, the feature list is quite extensive, but you can think of this as building groups or teams. Some might call those team sites or communities of practice, chats, forums, social Q&A, idea management. The list is really quite extensive. So we see Telligent as being a logical extension to Sitecore to add those interactive elements to a Sitecore-based intranet and integrating those tightly together. And then finally, on the last is Coveo, so an enterprise search product in its history. But we see Coveo come into play really for two reasons in these scenarios. One is that an intranet is usually expected to include sources of content from many locations, or the search, I should say, is. Coveo has many connectors that can pull in external content. And then there's also an aspect of intelligence to the way Coveo does search rankings, and that can be valuable in many situations. So 3 links there for you to explore more. I'm not going to try to demo each of these products. They're hours long each. At the end, we will make the offer for a demo. If you want one, you can reach out after the webinar or put it into the questions. So with that in mind, let's jump in. So really the first use case that we want to talk about are our knowledge bases. And these are procedures, policies, processes, highly curated, very important material. In some cases, if it's incorrect, there's legal implications. So we want employees to find the right information quickly, and the owners of that content really need to ensure that it's accurate at all times. So when we look at a broad problem statement that we hear from customers that are deploying intranet solutions and have this notion of a knowledge base, it's really that rapid access to high quality content on those internal procedures and policies. If there is a change required, it has to be done immediately, again, because of those either legal or safety implications in many cases. And as many customers are geographically distributed with their office, there's also the need to manage translation. So it might have been created in North America, but an office in Brazil requires it in Portuguese. And again, that time delay has to be quite short. So knowledge bases kind of holistically this is kind of what we see. If we drill down a little bit further, we kind of separate the world into there's the folks that own the content, and then there's the consumers of the content, or the employees in the case of an intranet. So again, the owners are really looking for that, it's easy to update. But a very important aspect of that easy to update is being able to combine content to form multiple versions of a process. So if we think of, again, a company that is geographically distributed, there might be 5 pages of content in a policy or a procedure, but 1 paragraph changes between North America and South America, for example. And not needing to duplicate that is a real driver we see in many of these knowledge bases. Being able to solicit feedback on the quality of the content is something that is more and more prevalent now. So common use case we would see here is the customer service representative is on the phone with a customer, they're looking at a procedure or a policy, they notice something is wrong, or maybe at least unclear. How do they get that information back to the content owners and track that feedback? And then finally, again, for the content owners, ensuring that periodic review. You don't want this content to be out of date or irrelevant, so how do they facilitate that? And then the translation piece as well. When it comes to the employees, the consumers of the content, of course they want to find it quickly. They need to be able to access it on any device, desktop, mobile, what have you. Many of our customers do have folks in the field, so mobile first is a possibility in many of these situations. Be able to request clarification, so kind of the flip of soliciting feedback. This might include things like instant message, like direct chat to the content owner. And then just being able to bookmark or favorite commonly used material, or getting notified of any updates. So let me switch over quickly just to show you how we might think about a knowledge base. in Sitecore. So the screen that I'm sharing here at the moment, simple demo site, not terribly designed. This is meant to be representative of where we would start from. But we're looking at an information page about a type of investment account, a registered education savings plan. And you can see here I'm logged in as Sam, and Sam has access to different areas of the intranet, his profile, his favorites, groups he's a member of, bookmarks, his dashboard, and he can switch divisions. I'll come back to that. Of course, there's the content page, and we can see that there's different areas here of content that have been assembled together. And then, finally at the bottom, there's the toolbar that really lets Sam know where did this content come from, who owns it, when was it last updated, how is it tagged, and if Sam has access, he can actually suggest edits to this page. So it was last modified today. If Marcia was online, this is an email link right now. If Marcia was online, this would turn into a chat. Tells us the versions, and we can also explore related content that have also been similarly tagged. So from here, Sam can see, where this content comes from. He can decide that he wants to be notified about any updates to this page, so he could watch this page. This will have the effect of putting him on an email notification anytime updates are made to this page. You can also favorite it, and as you can see, he could watch the entire section of content or this entire topic area as well, and similarly undo all of this. One other small nuance I'll point out here, of course, multiple languages. Of course, Sitecore handles multiple languages quite well. But another aspect of a knowledge base that we've often encountered is multiple divisions inside a company or multiple companies inside a family will share an intranet or share content, but there's the need to alter it or rebrand it. And that's something, again, Sitecore can handle quite easily. So Sam right now has access to both divisions that are set up in this demo. If he wants to see what the view is in the other division, he just simply needs to click the button. And in this case, the content is the same, but you can see the branding has updated. So again, very flexible way to share content and repurpose content, even across differently branded companies that are in a larger family or group of companies. So what I'd like to show next is actually inside the Sitecore editing interface, and how, when we're dealing with things like a knowledge base, how we might be able to share and assemble content using personalization rules. So a simple example here, if we look at this, RESPs and bank accounts tells us anybody can open a bank account. Well, what if the regulations are changing? Maybe in January 1st of this year, the advice changed because laws are changing. So let's go to Sitecore and take a look at how we might address that. We don't want to update the whole page, of course. We're really just looking to correct that one area. So I've bypassed the login. I've jumped straight into Sitecore's experience editor. So this is, for those of you that have not seen it, the primary editing interface in Sitecore. It's your WYSIWYG view, essentially, of any page that's in the system. So you can see when I'm in this view, it's a little more broken out. It's showing me all the different components that are on the page. And if I was to look at my RESPs and bank accounts, I've already gone through the step of I've personalized this content so that I can view, there's the default view, and there's also another view of this content that I've termed bank accounts 2017 and on. And it was quick, but you'll see there's a new sentence here. It is recommended that non-resident citizens have a bank account. That's the new advice. So the question is, how did I do that? And this is where the Sitecore personalization aspects come into play. So if I personalize a component, there's the default condition. There's no conditions. It's showing me the default content for bank accounts. And I created a condition, when this date has passed, then show this alternate version of the content. So you can string together as many of these as you might need to be able to modify the content for situations like this. But also, because you're in an intranet, you know a lot about the user that's viewing the content. So let me just show the interface here. Another common example that we would see is there may be versions of content that vary based on someone's access level. So for example, they're a manager in the organization, or maybe they're in a particular office location. That would change the content. And it's as simple as going in here, creating a new condition. I'll pick the same pattern as before just for the sake of the demonstration. And I'm looking for where the date has passed. So this is the condition. And if I knew maybe the regulations were going to change again in July, I could actually be ready for that in advance. I could pick July 1st, say OK, and then again select the version of the content. I'll just select my existing content for now for the sake of the demonstration and use this. So I save this on my page, push my page through workflow, it gets published out to the site, and now it's ready to go. As soon as that date flips over, I would be able to see that new content automatically. To call out that example maybe of the manager, so again, because you're in the intranet, you're probably tied to Active Directory or a similar system, you'd be able to personalize based on roles or security. So things like, so where the current user is a member of a specific role, you would specify the role that they're in. So it's popping up the list of built-in roles. I'm going to select group managers. This is the list of managers that are essentially in the organization, and I hit OK. So what's really powerful about this is it's accessible to the content author. You don't need a programmer, and it's just there out of the box if you've built your content templates to support this feature of the Sitecore Experience platform. So with that, I'm going to pop back to the slides. So we've three big buckets of personalization. I've touched on the idea of group membership, the idea of the manager. Profile characteristics, so by that, the person logged into the intranet, the employee, the partner, we know things about them. We can personalize based on their office, their location, what business group or division they're part of, maybe who they work for or who their colleagues are. All of that information is probably available to us and may allow you to personalize your content in a way that would be more appropriate. The last one comes into play a bit more when we're talking about intranets that have social interactions. So again, communities of practice, if you're managing ideas, you can actually trigger personalization based on contributions people have made to the broader community. And this is a way to reward them and promote them. Again, Sitecore can retrieve that information and use that to personalize as well. So it's usually you start with security, you probably start adding on profile characteristics that you know, and then you start exploring other ideas, things like social achievement or the content that they've looked at on the intranet. So an intranet is, I guess in our experience at this point, not just for employees. The people inside your organization need to work with your partners, your resellers, possibly directly with your customers. And this is where the idea of partner portals and self-service come into play, and they're often tied to the intranet in some way, shape, or form. This is usually driven by lowering the cost of self-service, and again, accurate information, of course. So problem statement that we generally see with external users, the business requiring the ability to share information with partners, resellers, distributors, and what they share, if we're talking purely content, ranges pretty wildly. It could be price lists, it could be full-blown courses on a new product or a new offering, could be really important information too, like safety sheets. You need to know this or your staff could be harmed. So it really runs the range. I think what's important about all of this though is while they are sharing it externally, there is still a notion of eyes only applied to this content. The final nuance here is it's not always people that are getting this content. Sometimes it's systems. And well, let's dig into that a little bit. So those external users getting that content out, what are the owners primarily concerned about? What we've seen is that it's really only the people that are allowed to see it should see it. And there needs to be gates and controls in place to prevent any sharing of sensitive information that's not appropriate. So there's a balance to strike there, of course. And then the last one is more about automation. When we see intranets in Sitecore or other platforms like SharePoint, there's almost always the request to, it would be great if we could send this information to the Salesforce instance or the dynamic CRM instance that we use with that particular partner. So we may be publishing content out to a portal, but we may also be publishing content to other systems like a CRM or an ERP. Pretty common, I think. Partners and the content consumers in this case, obviously up-to-date information, but they don't want to be overwhelmed. So this is where that aspect of personalization applies, where you can. So if you're a product-based organization, they only want to see the information about products that are actually things they resell or things that they've bought. Findability, of course, that they can contact a subject matter expert for support. So who do I go to if I have a question about that material? That can often get lost in these types of exchanges. And then lastly, but probably the first thing an external party will complain about is how easy is it for them to log in and authenticate to this secure site? How do you remove that barrier for them? So this is where we see kind of two common patterns in Sitecore intranets. One is there's a portal, there's an area inside the intranet where those users can come in, they can browse through the content, they get almost all the functionality that an employee gets, but they're just siloed into an area. This works really well when when that authentication is possible. Sometimes there's technical barriers to that, but there's fairly limited additional development to make this work. And it can support really rich functionality. Like it can be a full list of here's all the products that you've ordered in the past. You get the full portal capability. It's not just content. On the flip side, when it's maybe a bit more about having spec sheets or brochures available, especially to a mobile workforce, we'll see customers more often wanting to use Sitecore to publish content out to a mobile app, whether it's iOS or Android. And we'll not go through the nitty-gritty of this, but really that screenshot here on the side describes what's going on. So any content in Sitecore, when we set up an intranet, we essentially define how it can be tagged or where it can be sent to. And when you publish the content, you have the choice of, is this content for the intranet, i.e. for employees? Is it going out to the mobile application, the mobile Salesforce? Or is it going to a partner portal, or all three? And this is security and workflow defines this, but it's really as simple as when the content is published. Sitecore is very good at that multi-channel approach, as we know, and it can push that content out to those various sources, and it just happens behind the scenes. What you need to figure out as an organization is much more of the governance of that content. How do you want to control it, and what are your rules of engagement on that content? So scenario 3 is one I've loosely termed engaged community, and this is a rather all-encompassing concept. It can be anything from communities of practice to forums, wikis, blogs. A project team needs to spin up a site so they can work together. But it's usually about capturing informal knowledge, getting a particular project done, and otherwise connecting people that are previously working in silos. So I think we've all heard similar requirements before. That problem statement, unlocking tacit knowledge, allowing employees, partners, customers to collaborate on specific work, and usually there's some expectation that we're going to spawn new ideas out of this and be able to move the organization forward or move the supply channel forward. The list is quite extensive, but it usually boils down to the biggest drivers for the organization are lowering staff support costs through self-correction and self-service. I know somebody who knows somebody and they can help me kind of a flow is pretty common. And then that last one that I've already mentioned, finding new ideas for improvements, whether that's for a service, a process, a product line, and trying to pull that out of the organization. When it comes to the users of these things, it's really about the quality of the interactions. You can build it, and they won't necessarily come. So this is about enabling a high-quality interaction. Recognition for contribution can be a pretty big driver of that. It does vary from community to community. And then there's the notion, of course, of ease of use. There's the how, but in solutions like this where it's collaborative, it's not the how as much as it is the when and the where. The timing becomes very critical. So this is where we really run into Telligent. So I'll go over it a little bit more depth, some of the different things that are inside Telligent and why we layer these into a Sitecore intranet. So the idea of groups, an area, you can collect a group of people, you can work together on something. They can be public, they can be private. Forums, Q&A, idea management or innovation management is probably one of the most popular features we see deployed in Telligent. So again, extracting ideas. But the list is extensive. The Telligent feature set probably goes on for pages and pages and pages. Two things I think I'll call it that are important, more at a technical level. Telligent and Sitecore are pre-integrated. They already know how to talk with each other. And because it always comes up in the Q&A at some point, Telligent talks to SharePoint as well, as does Sitecore. So again, high-level overview of what Telligent can do, but if you're trying to build any type of social aspect on your intranet, Telligent is really what can add to that. Carrying on a little bit with that, you can build it, but they might not come. This is an excerpt from an older report, I think 2008, 2009, titled Why Communities of Practice Succeed and Why They Fail. Still relevant today, and I think applies more broadly to any type of interaction between employees, internal or external. And that's really about the people that are using these tools, the experts, need to have the freedom to do it. There has to be that top-down drive from management that encourages intra and extra organizational collaboration. And then that last one is the interaction must occur at a place and time chosen by the people. You can't force it. The tools have to be there to support the problem when it arises or the opportunity when it arises, but you can almost never force it. So you have to find what those early wins are, get those out in front of your user base, and then enable them with the technology. So I want to touch on one example of this, and if there's, excuse me, and this was a project that we had done with Bayer CropScience in Brazil. And again, a combination of, in this case, Sitecore and Telligent. And this was really a way for Bayer to connect their entire supply chain. So from farmers, distributors, even journalists who are interested in what's going on or holding them to account for their environmental practices. Gathering all of them together in one place where they could share ideas. So the end result for Bayer was approximately 13% sales increase. So that's pretty tangible. And they grew to about 80,000 users in 3 months, and it continues to rise. But if you look at this solution in Bayer, what this essentially is a number of groups that are centered around an idea or a topic and them sharing what they think would essentially improve the situation for everyone. The Bayer management team monitoring, contributing, digesting that, and then bringing it back in-house to improve what they're trying to do. Search. Seems simple. I guess everyone expects it to be like Google. Is usually what I hear. Make it like Google. That's great. I think there's a slight nuance though in an intranet. Search is not just about finding things fast. It's also about correctness. and search behaviors in intranets are a little bit different. The most popular thing might not be the right thing. If you think of an old policy from 10 years ago, it's still there and no one's taking it down. You don't want that to show up. You want the latest version to show up. So there's a slightly different nuance, I think, to search in an intranet. But where this really comes to is what most customers will tell us is we've tried to do search in the past. Findability was kind of hit and miss. We think it was the technology, but it was also just really hard to tune and manage the search. We didn't know how, or it was too complicated. You then throw in the fact of there's maybe multiple languages in a lot of these intranets now, and that expectation that the search encompasses multiple systems. Great, you've indexed the intranet, but what about the ERP, or what about the records management system? That's kind of a base level expectation. So when we look at the content owners, correct search results, and again, correct I think has a special meaning in an intranet case. The ability to change and define the search UI and present options to the users, pretty prevalent. Excuse me. Being able to manage special terms, so every industry has its own language. How do you make sure the search finds what someone's actually looking for? And that can also have regional variations, of course, as well. What I would refer to it as might not be the same as my colleagues in the UK use, but we mean the same thing. And we're both searching in English. Really key to remove that outdated content, and then security as well. Of course, when you search, you should only see the content that you're allowed to see. When it comes to the consumers, again, search is really they just want it to work. But the three functional behaviors we probably most often see the request for is I can narrow scope. So the idea of advanced search in some cases, so select I want this area of the internet, but more and more commonly the idea of filters or facets, of course. That expectation that the system can understand their choice of language or their choice of terms. And then the ability to save searches as well, so they can go back to those and use those as a point of reference for commonly executed searches or queries that they do. So this is where I think it's worth drawing the comparison a little bit between Sitecore out of the box and Coveo, and maybe why we might make that jump. So as many of you on the phone probably already know, Sitecore out of the box supports Lucene, Solar. They've recently added support for Azure Search. Great indexer, can pull in all the content in Sitecore and make it available to a search inside the content authoring interface, or possibly also on the website. And you can build anything you want with Effort. It's very flexible, very open. But it is fundamentally a developer's tool, and you need to decide at what point might you switch to something like Coveo. And that's, I think, where we move to Coveo, those connectors for those 40 plus systems, that expectation that the intranet will federate search. The automated relevance that Coveo brings, it learns as people search and can start re-ranking, so it lowers the burden on the author to manage search. Coveo brings the ability to actually define the Sitecore search UI using Experience Editor. And then it still has an API that lets you build anything you want. So one of the ways that I like to think about this is you start with basic search. It's not really integral to the user experience. Your content's pretty much in Sitecore. It's probably a single language. And you're not too concerned about things like a thesaurus or stemming. Then it goes up. Search starts to become important. There's a lot of content. IA by itself doesn't solve the problem. Maybe you've got multiple languages. Maybe the idea of a thesaurus comes into place. You're probably still okay in Sitecore, but you might be starting to push the boundaries. That's when you started getting into the advanced search, and this is where you're really weighing what is the value to the user to have a really high quality search. So it's become critical. There's a base expectations for facets, filters, advanced searches. There's possibly multiple content sources. Languages have probably been translated. And I think just as important as any of those things, search is viewed as important enough that someone is actually responsible to start monitoring how it's performing. Are people getting good results? So you hit that advanced point, and then there's, let's call it nirvana, but really search is the core part of the user experience. And you'll see some intranets that are like this. It's not navigation driven so much as it's search driven. And it makes sense when there's a certain volume of content. So the ROI in these cases, though, is excruciatingly clear in most cases. And the search is not just monitored, it's actively monitored. So when we kind of draw the simple line at Nonlinear, but when we think about Sitecore out-of-the-box search versus Coveo, we kind of place it about there. So the idea that you can do basic search and search with Sitecore out of the box, you can get pretty close. But if you're really wandering towards that advanced or optimal view of search, then you probably want to start considering something like Coveo. And again, Coveo, a platinum technology partner of Sitecore, there are integrations pre-existing that allow you to essentially plug the two platforms in together, as well as the other 40-plus connectors that Coveo already has. So a good way to enhance your search. The last one that we've got in here is just the idea of dashboards. I think we all know what they are, right? Pretty popular in intranet. I want to be able to assemble all the content that I want to see in one spot. I think the important thing about a dashboard is that it can't just be the intranet content. It's got to also be external content sources in most cases. And that's about adoption too, and I'll call that out. So content owners can almost always want some part of that dashboard where they can force important corporate information into the user's dashboard. So corporate communications, if they're responsible for the intranet, may need to get an important notice that they really want to get that out onto the dashboard. You need to judge that carefully. The idea that new widgets for your dashboard can be defined by a user, again, I think at table stakes, and then also control who can see what widgets with security. So maybe there's widgets that are only for managers or executive levels, or maybe it's only for a particular business division. All of that we see as being something native to Sitecore's capabilities. On the consumer side, again, the base user expectations we would all have of a dashboard of case. Saving multiple dashboards, being able to flip back and forth, sharing their dashboard with a colleague so that they like it, they can use it. And then that last one is including non-company or external information. Not all organizations would want to enable that feature, but it's one of those simple things that actually helps drive adoption. You don't leave it wide open, but things like local news or weather, they're almost always a request, and they're simple things that don't really detract from the user experience. Screenshot of one such example. In this case, live charting from a web service for different energy, demand, supply, and pricing, all built in Sitecore. But let me show back in the demo quickly, just the basic idea again. So Sam's dashboard, I've already set up two simple views here. I've connected to the national news in Canada as well as PBS News in the US. It's in the view mode. If I want to, as a user, change this, I of course can switch it into design mode, browse through my library of widgets. Again, these would be defined by the owner of the intranet. And if I decided, well, I need a new RSS feed, I drag it on. I would paste in my, let's copy the URL again, and save, and you can see I've got all of a sudden my new RSS feed. And I can move these around and all those things that you'd expect. So again, completely based on Sitecore technology, this dashboard, as you can see, you can drag it around, define new widgets at a user, and very quickly add new ones. And that said, so more complex example here with our charting, simple example there in the demo. This is just a few usability tips if you're thinking about a dashboard. Getting that default configuration to a user, so when they first go to the dashboard, if it's blank, what we've seen is people don't take the time to configure it. So if you think through what the right defaults will be, you'll see a much greater adoption of the dashboard, and the intranet in general is what we've seen. The demo I've just shown you was drag and drop, and it is what everybody asked for. I'll just caution on one area. Be careful. If your intranet is very heavily used from a mobile perspective, you need to create a different interaction model for mobile. Base expectations that any widgets can be edited, collapsed, removed, of course, as you saw in my drag and drop. And then finally, that area that corporate can take over. Seen some instances where that was maybe a little too prominent and actually became a barrier to people using the dashboard because they felt that the corporate organization was taking over their dashboard as opposed to allowing to customize it. So again, a balance to strike there. So just some final notes on how do you measure an intranet. I don't think there is one number for this. I think it's very dependent on what you are trying to do as an organization on your intranet, but there are some common themes, I think, and I've kind of bucketed them into two. There's task completion and efficiency, so the users get something done more quickly than they did before, or there's an aspect of content quality. So again, reducing risk usually is what content quality is about. So things like the number of calls to support desk, very easily measured, number of clicks or searches to get the right results, time to update and disseminate a content change, all pretty common metrics that apply to almost anybody in some way or another. And then we would need to define more for your specific situation. On the other side, if you're doing more social or more interactive intranets, things like the number of new ideas that are funded. So for example, in that Bayer case study that I called out, how many of those ideas got pulled back into Bayer and got funded for improvement. And then last one, as I'd mentioned before, just because it helps drive adoption, it's just the idea of social badges and recognition. Are people engaging? Are they wanting to gain that recognition? And if the answer is no, it might hint at an adoption issue. So last piece, and then we'll stop for our Q&A, is how do we get this done quickly? An intranet can be a big project. And our short answer is the KEYSTONE INTRANET. So it's something that Nonlinear has built over the course of our approaching 9 years of work with Sitecore, and predates a little bit into some other CMSs. And really what we've done is we've tried to distill the most common components and functionality and wrap them up into essentially a out-of-the-box intranet that you can get running quickly, save 3 to 4 months, and you know that it's going to work well with Sitecore, with Telligent, with Coveo, gets you running faster, and really starts letting you drive ROI quickly from your intranet. So just at a high level, what do the features look like in that intranet? A variety of pre-built responsive templates. I've called out probably the most commonly asked for ones. Obviously the home page, the dashboard, news events, the idea of department sites. So you have something for HR or for safety. Groups or clubs, largely connected to Telligent, and then a variety of different content pages that you can use to manage content in your intranet. That's supplemented by a larger library of components. We're up to about 120 now. So if you think of the content that you have to manage, there's a really vast library that lets you fulfill probably 80 to 90% of your content needs with just adding components to the page in the experience editor. Good practices on content management, workflows built in, taxonomy is built in, profile pages, searches, all there ready to go. And then just kind of a final note, those last two, built-in support for Active Directory for single sign-on. We can connect to other systems based on your needs. And we support Sitecore 7.2 through 8.2. And when a new version of Sitecore comes out, we support that as well. So just watching my time, I think we're right where we expected to be. So thank you. One last note before I go to the Q&A. Nonlinear takes a lot of pride in our thought leadership on Sitecore. So we publish a book every quarter, 2 times a year. If you want a copy, send us a note. happy to ship you out a copy. So with that, if you're looking for a book or if you want to request a further consultation or actually a deeper demo of the products and the accelerator that I've described, that's how you find us. And we'll go to questions.
Great. Thank you, Glenn, for that great presentation. I see we have a few questions come in. As a reminder, you can continue to send them in through the chat box. So we'll kick off the Q&A right now. First question is, do I need to deploy Sitecore and Telligent and Coveo?
Great question. You could do this in a phased approach. So they are distinct products. If you were going content first with your intranet, if that was your primary use case, things like news, events, department sites, knowledge bases, you could spin up Sitecore and then layer on the other technologies at a later phase if required. So they are separable.
All right. The next question that we have is, what is the typical time frame for implementation?
That's a little tougher to answer. It varies, of course, depending on your needs. Typical in our world would be 6-ish to 8 months, but that, of course, can be faster, it can be longer. It depends on how much content, how much of a redesign you're going through, and usually how many integrations might exist in the intranet. Those are probably the big drivers of that timeline.
Great. Another question we have is, what are the biggest risks?
What are the biggest risks? I think when it comes to an intranet project, it's that clear understanding that you know what you're trying to achieve. It sounds a little cliche, perhaps, but if the committee or the group that is responsible for the intranet is not clearly aligned on what they're trying to get out to it, you'll quickly lose your vision and prioritize things that are not going to really add value as quickly as you think. So being crisp on what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and what the return, I think, are really the keys to laying the right foundation.
All right. Another question we have is, can you integrate with SharePoint?
So yes, I think I touched on that briefly. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. Sitecore itself has a SharePoint connector framework that will synchronize content into Sitecore. Telligent also provides similar functionality. So there's plenty of ways you could sync content between a Sitecore Telligent intranet and a SharePoint or an Office 365 installation.
All right. Can the intranet live in the same instance as my website?
Technically, yes. There'd be, I guess, some security concerns to maybe validate. So, of course, Sitecore is a multi-site platform. If you had your website and your intranet in the same instance, you could separate them with security. But I think it's worth pointing out that does mean that they're a shared installation, and the security team might have some questions about, the possible risks that might impose. So I would probably recommend they're separated by default, and then decide specifically to combine them if the security was acceptable.
All right, I see we have a few more questions here. Does your solution integrate with Active Directory? How do you do a single sign-on?
Yeah, so Active Directory is actually a connector from Sitecore, so that would be installed as part of our intranet accelerator. We use the Sitecore product. It connects to Active Directory, and then any user that's on the network can log in through AD. Other SSO options are available, so if you're doing SAML or claims-based, we would just need to know what those particular APIs are for the system you're using, and it can be integrated, of course.
All right. Another question we have is, what about large videos?
So we've seen a growing request for videos and intranets for sure, usually town halls, training materials, pretty common. Sitecore can host video files, but I think you'd want to assess just how large are they. Do they need to be streamed across multiple regions? I think most recently where we've seen people go is they'll use Sitecore's media framework, and they may be using Uyala or Brightcove to host the videos. So it gives you the built-in streaming capability. Or we've also used Azure Video as well and embedded the Azure player. And that again would allow you to create secure videos for your intranet, but give you all of the good streaming capabilities that come with those actual video platforms.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. What about document management?
Little more complicated, I guess, in that case. When most people say document management, they're usually talking about collaborating together on a document is kind of one aspect of that, so a la SharePoint or Office 365. And then the second aspect of that is sometimes a bit more of a touch of records management, so stamping it, creating the definitive record. I think in those cases, you're probably best to stick with what you've got if you've got a solution that works. SharePoint's probably still the most common one we see, and I think that platform does it well, and you should probably stick with that approach and then integrate with Sitecore via the connector.
Great, thank you, Glenn. So we're just at about time for today's session. If we didn't get to your question live, we'll follow up directly with you post-call. We want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and again, Glenn, for the great presentation. As a reminder, a link to the recording will be sent out within the next few days. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions as well. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.